You ever tried your best to explain something that's amazed you, only for the other person to just flat out not understand? For me, that's VR, also known as virtual reality. Over the years, I heard all the stories about what it was like for other people. I had an inkling of what it may have been like, but again, the idea of imagining yourself in another person's shoes is hard to fathom, even in an urban and digital environment. I had known about the concept for a time, but I didn't realize how far it went back. The term VR was originally coined in 1935 by Stanley G. Weinbaum, who wrote the sci-fi story Pygmalion Spectacle. The premise was about a piece of technology that transported people to a different reality, where everything could be felt, touched, and seen. This was a concept unheard of back in the 30s, but it wouldn't see any practical applications until the 50s, starting with the Sensorama coming out in 57. Over the next few decades, governments and research institutions would continue to develop the concept of virtual reality, from the head-mounted display developed in 61, NASA with their iterations in the 80s, Atari, Sega, and Nintendo duking it out, which ended up resulting in them all failing miserably in the VR battle, and finally, the Beachhead 2000 VR machine. This was the last time VR would be touched at this stage, because companies in the 90s and early 2000s realized the technology just wasn't there yet. At least not until 2012, when Oculus VR would be founded by Palmer Luckey, Brendan Arabe, Michael Antonov, and Nate Mitchell. Over the course of 4 years, they would finally release the first commercially successful VR gaming headset in history, the Oculus Rift CV1. It was a new era within gaming history, and was quite literally a glimpse of things to come. The big gaming and tech companies wanted a piece of the pie, and pulled their own resources to make their own headsets. Sony, Valve, HTC, and many others would release headsets over the years. In 2022, the technology has only gotten better, as well as the lineup of games. Titles like Half-Life Alyx blew the minds of everyone upon its release, and Beat Saber is one of the most popular VR games out there today. But today I'll be talking about another one that was released in 2016, a title that would help convince the masses that VR this time wasn't bullshit. That game is SUPERHOT VR. In 2016, the first SUPERHOT was released, displaying a fresh take on the FPS genre that hadn't been seen before. Its time-stop mechanic and minimalistic art style helped make the game a massive success, so much so that when the Oculus Rift kicked off, they hopped on board to make a VR version of this game. You see, I had just recently bought a VR myself, buying the Oculus Quest 2 because Valve had already depleted my wallet from the sales, so I settled for this one as a starting point. I was already amazed by the total change of perspective from just the Oculus menu as well as the environment itself, and I knew there was more to come in the selection of apps and games to choose from. With my pocket change, I bought SUPERHOT VR and began playing immediately. Upon launching SUPERHOT VR, you are shown a familiar boot-up sequence if you had already played the first one. You're then immediately transported to a white room with a figure in front of you. You grab the gun with your motion controllers and pull the trigger. The game begins, reminding you that time only moves forward when you do. Over the course of SUPERHOT VR, you are taken to several different places, using the weapons that are close by or taking them off the figures by force. In between, you are then taken to your apartment, with a set of monitors and a VR headset, as well as a floppy disk. Again, we don't get to learn who we're playing as and if it has any relation to the first SUPERHOT. The only thing we know for certain is that we can't stop playing, and we see the consequences of our addiction to the game unfold, as the apartment becomes more ruinous and corrupted by the system's influence. You advance through the story by grabbing a black object of sorts that takes you to the next mission, until the last one takes you to the apartment. You could see this as a break from the action, and it gives you a moment to look around and appreciate the effort that they've put into creating a whole new environment that's different from the white and red space. As far as I know, you can't really interact with anything else besides the three things that you can grab onto: the floppy disk in front of you, the computer that you insert the disk into, and finally, the VR headset that you can grab and pull towards you. That takes you to the next mission. Over the course of SUPERHOT VR, this will become a pattern, but as I said, each time you return to the apartment, the condition of it worsens, eventually leading to the climax of the game. Once again, there isn't much of a story to work with here. Like the first game, it relies heavily on constructing a meta-narrative, trying to break the fourth wall by having the system more or less speak directly to you, as if you're the player. But again, the success of SUPERHOT resided in the gameplay and not so much the story. The real meat and potatoes is in the gameplay of SUPERHOT VR. I'm just gonna say it. SUPERHOT VR feels so much more satisfying than the original SUPERHOT. The complete immersion of the VR's motion sensors and SUPERHOT's time-stop system is like a perfect marriage. When you pull off a flurry of bullet parries and headshots, following a hook in the gut and a ninja throw, all in the same instance, you feel like a fucking badass. I've played many satisfying shooters like Doom 2016, Doom Eternal, Max Payne 3 and Fear 1, but never anything like SUPERHOT VR, or any VR game for that matter. Sure, it's possible I could be experiencing the honeymoon phase and the novelty could eventually wear off, but SUPERHOT VR has sold me on the concept completely, and I've only just gotten started in my VR journey. Now, because of the limited mobility of VR gaming, your character can only move within the parameters you've established with your headset, and even then, you won't be able to walk ahead much. I've had instances where I've almost tripped over and hit a wall after trying to knock a figure's head off. It can happen, and it's shocking how easy it is to lose your awareness of space while in SUPERHOT VR. Your character can respond to the hand gestures, crouching and peeking and diving that you perform. It works really well here, and if you're quick enough, you can get your Matrix diving skills into play. In a way, SUPERHOT VR does feel a bit more forgiving than the original, and that's because the game compensates for your lack of complete mobility when playing the game. It's not like you have a mouse and keyboard to give you unlimited movement. It's not like it's expecting you to run all over the house. Most people will be confined to a room with limited space, so take that into account. Regardless, SUPERHOT VR's movement is responsive and satisfying. You have 3 guns to play with: the pistol with 4 rounds once more, the Uzi which replaces the rifle, and the sawn-off shotgun that's smaller. You can dual wield these weapons, making for some pretty devastating combos during combat, and the fun doesn't stop there. You can use your fists pretending to be Rocky Balboa, and one-hit enemies when they get close enough. You also have objects you can use if they're within reach, and throw them at people, dropping them instantly. I gotta say though, it can be tricky doing it. A lot of the times I throw them too far up or too high, but I'm still getting the hang of it. And finally, a knife that functions as the main melee weapon. I have come across other melee weapons too, but they don't last very long. In fact, you shouldn't get attached to anything you use. SUPERHOT VR forces you to be adaptable, and given the flexibility and motion you have, you can get away with a number of things you couldn't in the original SUPERHOT. The figures with guns will either rush you or fire from a distance, melee figures will close the gap, and unarmed ones will either hit you or find a gun to shoot you. Unfortunately, there aren't any variations in the enemy types. Like the first game, it's just one foe, where the only difference is what they're carrying, which is disappointing. After you beat the game, you're left in your shithole of an apartment once more, but this time with a number of discs to inspect. They represent challenge modes that let you play the levels once again, but with different factors depending on which disc you select. They are quite hard, and will push your skills to the limit. You also have endless mode, where you take as many figures down as possible before they take you out. Thankfully, you do have the option of selecting a new profile so that you can start the game fresh if you wish. This helps greatly for people that just either want to start again, or do a speedrun for SUPERHOT VR. The graphics and sound haven't changed a great deal from the first game, but given that VR graphics still have a long way to go, and blurriness has been an issue since the first release of the Oculus, let's just say that the game isn't exactly a graphical powerhouse, not in the way of a game like Half-Life Alyx. But it's not meant to be, and SUPERHOT VR's immersive gameplay makes you forget the game's minimal presentation. But the game, however, does open a great deal of more detail when you're shown the apartment, which looks really nice, and I love the personal touches they have added to each instance. The game sounds great, even with the Oculus Quest 2's built-in audio, but again, not much has changed here. It's still pretty much the same as before, and the main reason is simple. SUPERHOT VR at the end of the day is the same game as the first one, but revamped to be compatible for the VR experience. SUPERHOT VR is one of the most immersive games I've ever played. I felt like I was in the system, enslaved to its will, knowing full well that I wanted more, and that I was doing nothing to stop myself. And that's one thing to take here, that you feel like you are actually there. Explaining what VR is like is pretty easy, but helping people understand it without them trying it is impossible. In 2022, many amazing titles have been released, and this style of gaming is still growing to this day. But in 2016, SUPERHOT VR set people against their own walls, made them break their own ceilings. It even freaked my own mum out when she was trying it for the first time, beating the shit out of the red figures as they got too close to her. SUPERHOT VR is a superior version of the first SUPERHOT, taking everything that already made it great and injecting it with one of the most unique ways of playing a game ever. I will admit that the initial investment is quite heavy, especially when you look at the Valve Index, or even the Oculus Quest 2, but frankly, there's never been a better time than now to pick up a headset. But when you do bite the bullet, do yourself a favor and buy SUPERHOT VR. It is a must play. Thank you for watching.